Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey into the many works of Junji Ito as I explain every one of his stories. This video we're going to look at two of his collections, Smashed and Lovesickness. I know I said in the last video that I would also cover Soichi and Gyo, but my god, Smashed and Lovesickness alone are jam-packed, and I couldn't squeeze any more in without feeling like I was rushing them. But don't worry, we have a lot to go through today. I did my whole Junji Ito spiel in the last video, so let's just get right into the video. This is every single Junji Ito manga explained, part 2. Okay, let's move into our next collection of stories, Smashed, starting with Blood-Sucking Darkness. Blood-Sucking Darkness follows Nami, a teen girl who got her heart broken when her boyfriend left her for a skinnier girl. She vows to lose weight and become a model, but sadly this leads to her having an eating disorder. She forces herself to throw up and eventually even pukes blood. After this, she begins having nightmares where the sky is raining blood, and when she awakes, she finds that her mouth and bed are covered in blood. She meets a boy from another class, Tani, who shows some concern about her sudden weight loss and is a little pushy about wanting to be her friend. She continues having the dream and waking up with blood on her every morning. She also finds that she has stopped losing weight. One day she spots Tani on the sidewalk and sees that he's deathly thin. He says that since Nami is on a diet, he's started one too because he likes her. The two end up spending time together, and eventually Tani asks Nami over to his house. He shows her his shed, which is full of bats, claiming them to be his pets. Nami notices that his hands have tiny bite marks all over them. He reveals that he has been letting them drink his blood, and this is why he's been losing so much weight. He then explains that these bats share blood with each other to survive, as one of the bats spits blood onto Nami. Most disturbing of all, Tani reveals that the reason Nami has been waking up with blood on her is because the bats have been coming into her room at night and feeding her Tani's blood. So Nami freaks out, of course, and runs. While pursuing her, Tani is hit by a train, tearing him to pieces. Strangely, the bats show up and begin transferring blood back and forth between Tani's remaining limbs, as if trying to keep him alive. Nami passes out and wakes up in a hospital thinking maybe this whole thing was a dream. However, Tani was in fact hit by the train, and despite his remains being picked up and buried, Nami can hear his voice calling her name and swarms of bats flying around the tracks. As she moves in close, she finds Tani's head. His eyes open wide as the bats bring blood into his neck. Then, as Nami approaches the head, Tani fully transforms into a giant bat and flies away. In the next moment, rain starts pouring down above her. It was a rain of blood, and that is Blood-Sucking Darkness. Ghosts of Prime Time. Two friends, Kisuke and Suguo, are eating lunch as Suguo accuses Kisuke of never laughing. So in order to make him laugh, the two head to a comedy club. Well, apparently they picked the wrong night as an unfunny comedy duo takes the stage. Their act is really surreal as they mention they're going to take over the world with comedy and keep making lame jokes. Suddenly, an audience member starts laughing hysterically, followed by everyone else. In fact, people go bonkers laughing their nuts off. Everyone but Kisuke, luckily, who drags his friend out of the place. Suguo calms down, but can't explain why he was laughing so hard, and Kisuke warns him not to see the duo again. Later that night, Suguo shows up to Kisuke's place, and he brought the weirdo comedians with him. They start making him laugh again, and nothing Kisuke can do will stop him. Finally, Kisuke pulls his friend inside, saving him once again, and telling him what he really saw that night at the comedy club. As the two started their act, Kisuke saw spirits come out of them and roam amongst the audience, tickling them to make them laugh. He casually mentions that he's been able to see ghosts since he was a kid, and that's why he never laughs. The tickling spirits then seep in through the cracks in the door and surround Suguo and Kisuke's mother, ultimately killing them. The story then wraps up as the comedy duo begin their first act on primetime television, implying that they will now be able to control the world with laughter. I don't know about this one, it might be the silliest of Ito's stuff, but it's a unique idea, I'll give him that. Roar. A couple of buddies, Masaki and Mamura, are out on a hike and apparently lost when they suddenly hear the loud roar of rushing water. As they move toward it, they see that it's a massive flood flowing through the area. They see that there are people caught in the flood, but are helpless in saving them. They follow the path of the flood for a while, speculating it may have been the result of a dam breaking, and find that the ground is actually dry where the flood passed. They camp for the night, and Masaki tells about his childhood, how his parents sent him to live with his relatives when he was just a baby, and how he was terrified of water there as a child. The next day, the two friends hear the roar of the flood once again, and strangely enough, it seems to be the exact flood from the previous day, as they notice the same woman caught in it. They stumble upon a house and meet an old man who gives them more insight into the floods. He explains that there was a real flood that occurred 30 years ago. Shortly after this, a phantom flood begins showing up as an illusion. He, his wife, and his son were caught in the original flood, but he managed to save himself and his baby boy. Unfortunately, his wife was swept up in the flood, and he spent the last 30 years trying to save her. But since she's only a ghost, she can't grab onto anything. He explains that he gave his son up to relatives while he pursued the rescue of his wife. Masaki asks what the name of his son was, but before he gets an answer, the flood once again comes through. The old man tries once again to save his wife and almost succeeds. However, she slips away. Only this time, the old man dives into the water and goes with her. As the two friends continue on, Masaki speculates that this couple might have been his parents, but now he'll never know. Earthbound. This is one of my favorite finds while making this video. A strange phenomenon begins occurring all over Japan when people start freezing in place in strange positions. Even if these people were forcibly removed, they would always return eventually. These people became known as Earthbound and gradually became a common sight. As the amount of Earthbound people increases, the general public begin thinking it might be contagious and avoid getting close to them. This story follows Asano, a volunteer for the Blue Sky Society, an organization that tries to help the bound people. She encounters a teen boy who is bound. His mother believes it has something to do with his dead dog, as the dog was buried next to where the boy is frozen. Meanwhile, Asano's boss appears earthbound in her apartment. With no other option, she attempts to sleep, but wakes up from a nightmare. She explains to her boss that she hasn't been able to sleep since an incident a few years ago when a man broke into her apartment and assaulted her. Now she moves constantly, feeling unsafe. As the days pass, the bound people begin solidifying and turning into human statues. Asano tries desperately to convince the teen boy to move and that he must get over the grief of losing his dog. The boy then admits the truth. His dog didn't die of natural causes, but instead was killed by the boy in an accident. This is when it begins to click. The people aren't bound from an emotional attachment, but rather a guilty conscience. We see several panels hinting at the real reason the Earthbound are stuck, including a pretty disturbing image of a dead baby in a trash bag, by the way. Asano returns to her apartment and confronts her boss. Apparently, she talked to her landlord and discovered that a woman was attacked and killed in her apartment building after a man snuck in, implying that her boss was the culprit and was tied here because of his guilt over the crime. Worse than that, she pieces together that he may be the same man who attacked her all those years ago. We then cut to her boss, among other Earthbound, being loaded into a truck, now completely solid. And Asano says she still continues to move from place to place. Death Row Doorbell. This story follows the Kowa family after a tragedy. During the family's day out on a fun drive, they're randomly attacked by a gang of thugs. Noriko, the daughter, managed to escape the attack and find help, but in the meantime, the gang killed her father and one of her brothers, as well as leaving her other brother and mother critically injured. The ringleader of the gang was put on death row for the crime, but began sending letters to the Kowas asking for forgiveness. These letters increased in quantity, and finally Noriko's brother called the prison and told them to stop sending the letters. The last letter they received was pretty creepy, with the man saying he wanted to apologize in person and would call them soon. After the letters finally stopped, the two siblings began getting phone calls from the gang leader asking, "When could I come by and apologize? Is now a good time?" Shortly after this call, the doorbell rings, and sure as hell, it's the gang member. The siblings call the cop, but the man vanishes. They double check to be sure, and the man is reportedly still in jail. Despite this, he reappears at the house night after night, and finally Noriko's brother snaps. He attacks the man, whose head caves into a pile of goop along with the rest of his body. In a strange act of cathartic revenge, the brother continues to beat the phantom into pieces every night. When Noriko tries to stop him, the brother remains violent, pushing her away. A few days later, Noriko finds her brother dead, having taken his own life. Noriko continued to see the phantom night after night, stuck in a never-ending hell. However, the trial finally concluded and the man was put to death. That night, Noriko waited anxiously and the doorbell did finally ring, but when she opened the door, no one was there, and that was the last she saw of the phantom. Not exactly a happy ending, and in fact, this story is just soaked in tragedy from start to finish. Yeah, the phantom eventually left, but only after the girl's whole family died, except for her mother, who's still stuck in a coma. I gotta say, one thing about Junji Ito is that he definitely doesn't cater to a happy ending. In Mirror Valley. This story follows a group of adventurers who are investigating rumors of a hidden village in a deep valley. The village was was started by a large clan, but after a big fight, the clan split into two groups, with each taking residence on one side of the valley, separated by a river running through the middle. As the adventurers look around the valley, they see that it's covered in broken glass, and it appears that each side of the valley had erected hundreds of mirrors pointed at each other before they eventually all shattered. As an experiment, the group decides to set up a large mirror on each side of the valley. Once the mirrors are set, the leader of the crew, Okumura, uses a telescope to gaze into the mirror on the opposite side, and the crew begin hearing a strange echo bouncing back and forth through the valley. As Okumura catches the reflection of the mirror on his side, he witnesses the infinity mirror or Drosti effect. Then, strangely enough, he begins to see into the past, and here we get into the real story of Mirror Valley. We see the villagers glaring at each other from opposite sides of the valley. It appears that one side is called Devil's Gate and the other is called Devil's Back Gate, and that the echo from before is present here as well. Then we're introduced to a young man, Hideo, as he sneaks into Devil's Gate. He's stopped by a group from the opposite clan who glare at him, which actually seems to hurt him. Hideo pulls out a mirror, however, and casts the reflections back at them, and their own stares cause them to freak out. Turns out Hideo was meeting up with his secret love, Toyomi. Hideo asks Toyomi to marry him, hoping they can run away together. But because the lovers are from opposite clans, their love is forbidden and they're kept apart. Soon after this, the couple's bodies are found floating down the river separating the village. Apparently, the two had died, hoping to be together in the afterlife. The villagers then began seeing the ghostly apparitions of Hideo and Toyomi passionately loving each other. Night after night, both clans witnessed this, and it fueled their hate even more, blaming the other side for the tragedy. It's revealed that the echo the crew was hearing was actually the sound of hatred bouncing back and forth between the clans, and now that echo has gotten much louder. Finally, the sound of hatred peaked and shattered all the mirrors in the village. Okumura, snapping out of the vision, realizes the same is happening now in the present. He grabs a rock and attempts to smash the mirror, but before he does, he sees his own reflection glaring back at him full of hatred. It seems the hatred that the valley harbored is now sinking into the present as well. As the mirror breaks, the adventurers shatter just like the glass, and the valley is silent once again. I don't want to be a ghost. This story begins with a man driving down the road at night when he suddenly encounters a woman covered in blood and unable to speak. He drives her to the hospital, and the doctor says she seems perfectly fine. In fact, the blood isn't even hers. But since she won't speak, they have no idea what happened. The next day, the woman shows up to the man's house. Here we see that the man, Shigeru, is married and his wife is pregnant. The woman, named Misaki, came by to thank him for helping her the night before and explains that she was actually part of an independent horror film and got lost in the woods, which is why she was covered in blood. As she leaves, she slips Shigeru a note with her number, and this freaking dirtbag starts cheating on his pregnant wife with her. One day after making love, Misaki tells Shigeru she can see his guardian spirits. She goes on to explain that her mother died while she was still in the womb, and she was born out of her mother's dead body. Her mother's soul couldn't move on, and so she turned into a ghost and breastfed Misaki. So now she can't be satisfied unless she feeds on ghosts. Long story short, this girl straight up eats spirits. Shigeru gets weirded out and decides to call the whole thing off, but arrives home one day to find that Misaki has told his wife about their affair. Well, of course his wife goes bananas and attacks them before taking her own life. Misaki continues to follow Shigeru around after this, saying she wants to eat his guardian spirits and that he now has two new ghosts, Shigeru's wife and baby. In a crazy few panels, Misaki leaps into the air, grabbing at what seems like nothing. She seems to have finally caught whatever she was after and bites at the empty space between her hands. Shockingly, blood sprays out, and Shigeru hears the screams of his wife and child. That's pretty horrifying. With his guardian spirits now gone, Shigeru's life goes downhill. He loses his house and job and eventually ends up in the hospital waiting to die. Here we see Misaki, licking her lips and waiting to consume his soul. Library Vision. Library Vision follows a married couple, Koko and her husband Goro. Goro inherited a large mansion from his parents, and every room is part of a giant library filled with over 150,000 books. The thing is, Goro is pretty weird about his books. He's claimed to have read every book 3 times, and he's super protective over them, freaking out if even a single book is out of place. Goro has also kept a detailed diary since the age of 4, which now spans dozens of volumes. He begins having nightmares about losing the books and becomes more and more obsessed, spending every spare second repeatedly checking every book in the library. Koko reads through Goro's diaries and learns more about his childhood. His mother was kind and beautiful, and would often read Goro her favorite book, Renee of the Winter Wind. When Goro was 4, his his mother left with a man, however, and his father went completely nutty. He would constantly read Goro the most terrifying novels, including a book called Spiny Hell, considered to be the scariest book ever made. His father eventually went completely mad and was put in a mental hospital. Back in the present, Goro begins seeing phantoms. First, he sees a beautiful woman who he believes to be Renee of the Wind, as she recites the entire novel from start to finish. He also sees a figure he calls Spiny Hell. The creepy man comes in through his window and recites the entire terrifying novel. In order to beat the phantom, Goro decides he'll recite Spiny Hell before the man can, and in reality, Coco watches as he goes completely mad, scratching himself. After this incident, Goro begins memorizing the books of his collection with a superhuman level of intelligence. He begins memorizing the books simply by flipping through the pages and even recites the entire encyclopedia. He eventually loses his sanity after memorizing almost every book in the mansion. The only books he didn't get to were his own diaries. Next, we cut to the mansion burning down with Coco sitting amongst the wreckage. She admits that this was her doing and that she accidentally killed her husband in the process. She mentions that the only family her husband has is his father, and there's no point in contacting him as he's locked up. In a final disturbing image, we see Goro's father. He looks exactly like Spiny Hell, the man that terrorized Goro. Splendid shadow song. A girl named Tamiyo encounters a strange street musician. The woman is playing a disturbing song based on pure hate. The next day, Tamiyo finds that she can't get the girl's song out of her head, to the point where she can't even concentrate. She tries tracking the musician down, but can't find her anywhere. One day, she hears the woman's song on the radio. Her name is Yu Kanade, and she's blown up since singing on the street with a #1 hit album. Turns out Yu's performing a live concert, and Tamiyo buys a ticket. Once again, the performance is full of hate, and Yu completely loses it on stage, breaking her guitar and then bashing her head open. That's pretty punk rock, dude. You might notice Yu and her terrible head wound are actually the inspiration of the smashed book cover. So after the concert, everyone who attended has the same issue as Tamiyo, with Yu's song stuck in their heads. This spreads through the airwaves, of course, and it becomes a strange form of mass hysteria, as thousands of people have trouble living normal lives with the songs constantly playing in their minds. Tamiyo goes to see a self-proclaimed noise doctor. When she arrives, she hears Yu's voice from another room. Here, the doctor explains that Yu is actually a patient of his, and he tells her backstory. Apparently, Yu dated a musician, but eventually broke up with him, which led to death by his own hands. Several weeks later, a strange and hateful song came into her mind. It was the song of the dead musician now haunting her. She attempted to rid herself of the song by playing it herself, and that brings us back up to the present. The doctor's attempting to somehow remove the sound from her brain, but when he tries it, something goes horribly wrong and she begins violently shaking. Then a musical specter along with all his disturbing songs comes rising out of her head wound, killing her. Immediately after this, Tamiyo starts screaming out as the song continues to torment her. The doctor looks at her and simply says, "The research continues." Smashed. Smash begins with a couple of buddies, Ogi and Sugio. Ogi has just returned from South America with a jar of a mysterious nectar. The nectar was given to him by a tribe who gave him one warning: don't be noticed eating it. Sugio tries the nectar and discovers it's absolutely delicious, so much so that other foods taste bad by comparison. So Sugio returns the next day with 4 of his friends, hoping to get another taste. Ogi doesn't seem to be home, so they all have a bite of the nectar. Then they discover a disturbing sight. Ogi's remains smashed against the side of the wall as if his body was completely crushed in an instant. The friends decide to get the hell out of there, but before they leave, Sugio spots a map left behind by Ogi. They separate the nectar so that every friend has their own jar. One of the friends takes a sip and is instantly smashed into the wall in an explosion of blood. Shortly after, another friend has the same thing happen to her. After this, they are terrified to drink the nectar, but they also have no appetite for other food and begin starving. They're now down to 3 friends: Sugio, Yu, and Kameda. They try to speculate on what it means to eat the nectar without being noticed, as they've all had some in front of each other and haven't died every time. Well, Sugio and Yu can't resist any longer and they both drink the nectar. And of course, they are smashed along with their friends. Kameda, the only one left, finds the map from earlier in Sugio's wallet and discovers it leads back to the area where the nectar's from. He finds the source of the nectar deep in the forest, a horrible tree with massive branches, some of which seem to be disappearing randomly before coming back. As Kameda moves in to extract the nectar, we see one of the branches flying towards him, and that's how it ends. The implication is that this mystical tree can somehow observe who's drinking its nectar and then can teleport its branches to smash them no matter how far away they are. Pretty crazy. crazy. I do want to mention that Smashed also contains 3 stories that revolve around Soichi, which is a character we'll get to later, and in fact they're actually chronologically the most recent Soichi stories. So I've decided to just cover those later when I go through the entire Soichi saga, because I think they're better with the full context. So let's move into Lovesickness. Lovesickness is similar to the Frankenstein collection in that most of the collection is actually a singular story, while the second half is just more short stories. The first 5 chapters here are all part of Lovesickness, but I'll label each chapter separately so you can keep track. Well, let's get into it. The Beautiful Boy at the Crossroads. It begins with a girl asking for a crossroads fortune. This is an old Japanese game in which you stand at a crossroad and ask the first person that passes to tell you your fortune. The girl covers her face and asks the passing stranger about her love life. He gives her a good fortune and she runs away. Next we meet Ryusuke, our protagonist. He's moving back to this town after being gone for 8 years. As they pull into the station, his mom comments about how foggy the town is, something that hasn't changed in 8 years. Ryusuke is quite popular as the handsome new transfer student, but his heart belongs to his childhood crush, Midori. We also meet Midori's friend Suzu. She mentions the Crossroads fortune game, and Ryusuke has a strange reaction, storming off. That night, we see a girl asking for her fortune to the first passerby. The stranger is a tall and beautiful boy with pierced ears and black clothes. He tells the girl she'll never find love and walks away. The next day, the girl's found dead with her throat slashed. Ryusuke seems to be freaking out over the incident as he relives his past. We learn that as a boy, Ryusuke was stopped by a woman at the crossroads. She says she's carrying the child of a married man. She then asks Ryusuke about her fortune. Will her and the father of the child live happily ever after? Why are you asking a little kid that, you psycho? But that's besides the point. Ryusuke just got out of a big fight with his mother and was in a bad mood, so he replied to the girl harshly, saying, "Not a chance, dummy." The next day, the woman was found dead with her throat slashed, with a box cutter in her hand. Ryusuke believes that he drove the woman to this with his bad fortune and now lives in guilt over the incident. Luckily, he has Midori to keep him company, but Midori reveals a shocking truth. The woman that died all those years ago was actually her aunt. Now Ryusuke is flooded with more guilt and begins avoiding Midori altogether. Suzu tries to talk to him for her, but no luck. That night, Suzu decides to get her fortune told at the crossroads and encounters the tall boy in black. She asks him about Midori and how she can help her friend, but he tells her to worry about her own heart first. The next day, she reveals that she's in love with Ryusuke as well, and she's glad that he's ignoring Midori so that she can have him for herself. Suzu then begins stalking Ryusuke, constantly following him and losing a weird amount of weight as well. Ryusuke harshly rejects her, and she tells him, "I love you so much, I could die." A sentence that will crop up a lot in this story. The next day, Ryusuke apologizes to her and begins to tell her his story from 8 years ago when she suddenly pulls out a box cutter and slashes her throat. After this, Ryusuke tries to track down the boy in black. He begins searching the crossroads where the murders happen, and he decides any fortune seeker he encounters, he'll answer with good fortunes to make up for what happened as a child. He begins to encounter the ghosts of the dead girls who died at the crossroads, covered in blood, and asking if they'll ever find love. Midori follows Ryusuke to see what he's been doing and encounters the boy in black. Suddenly, the boy vanishes and Ryusuke appears. The fog clears up and the two see no signs of the boy. That wraps up the first chapter, so let's move into A Woman in Distress. Ryusuke and Midori encounter a woman at the crossroads. She asks them her fortune as she's pregnant with a married man's child. Of course, this reminds Ryusuke of the incident 8 years ago, and he bolts, leaving Midori with the woman. Feeling bad for her, Midori invites her to her house to talk with her. The woman won't stop asking what she should do and is so obsessed with an answer that she won't even have a normal conversation. Even when Midori gives her an answer, she continues to return asking her advice over and over. When Midori's father finally yells at the woman telling her to get lost, the woman freaks out and repeatedly bashes her stomach with a potted plant, killing her unborn child. Later on, Ryusuke encounters the woman at the crossroads again. She completely freaks out on him, and when he leaves her, she starts following him home. She continues to show up at his house, even sneaking into his window. At one point, she admits she killed her lover's son after kidnapping him from kindergarten. Damn, that's dark. She's so obsessed with the married man that she declares she's going to get a tattoo for him. The next time Ryusuke and Midori see the woman, she's covered head to toe in tattoos. She screams out in agony as she realizes she's ruined her life and explains that this all happened after meeting a boy in black at the crossroads. The boy told her her problem wasn't serious enough and to come back when she had a real problem. This made the woman develop a pattern of constantly creating worse problems for herself in order to forget her previous issues. The next day, the news covers a story about a wanted woman setting herself on fire, ultimately dying by creating one last big problem. Okay, moving on to the next chapter, Shadow. Ryusuke is still constantly patrolling the crossroads looking for the boy, and he's now being bullied at school. The other students call him Dead Man because he seems lifeless and has lost weight. He's also blamed for the death of Suzu and is harassed about it. Ryusuke's friend from the town he lived in before, Tajima, comes to stay for the weekend, and he tells him everything that's happened. Tajima feels bad for his friend and decides to help him pursue the boy at the crossroads. The two split up despite Ryusuke's warnings. As Tajima travels through the thick fog, he soon encounters several ghosts of the dead women, including Suzu, who says something quite unsettling. She talks about how much she loves Ryusuke with his black clothes and pierced ears. Tajima then returns to Ryusuke, and due to Suzu's description, he asks him, "Are you the boy at the crossroads?" He theorizes that perhaps Ryusuke is subconsciously acting as the boy in black. Ryusuke is offended and explains this can't be the case, and Tajima apologizes for the accusation before leaving back home. Back at school, things have gotten much worse, as the rumor that Ryusuke is actually the boy has spread through the school. But this is easily refuted as his ears aren't pierced. However, things get a lot worse when Ryusuke wakes up in the middle of the night to find he has thumbtacks piercing his ears. His newly pierced ears only reaffirm people's belief that he is the boy, and he's also garnered some admirers. Some girls in school who are infatuated with the boy in black, and they now believe that boy to be Ryusuke. They begin to chase him down like maniacs, and at the same time, some of the boys show up from school to try to kill him as revenge for Suzu's death. He manages to escape, but when he gets home, he finds black clothes in his bed, leaving even him to question everything. He finds a box cutter on the floor as well, and he puts it to his own neck, thinking of ending it all, when he notices a shadow outside of his window. He chases the figure to find it's Tajima. He never actually went home, and he was the one spreading the rumors, as well as piercing Ryusuke's ears and leaving the clothes. It seems that Tajima has been following the orders of Suzu's ghost. He attempted to drive Ryusuke crazy with guilt and confusion, hoping he would take his own life. That way, Suzu could be with him in the afterlife. Suzu appears, but says, "This isn't the boy." She leaves in despair, and Tajima is left with a mental illness, ending up in a hospital. And that moves into the next chapter, Screams in the Night. This chapter starts with Ryusuke's house being swarmed by the fangirls who still think he's the boy in black, forcing him to run away from home and live in an abandoned shack. Midori finds him and finally breaks down, asking why Ryusuke hates her so much. Finally, Ryusuke tells her that he likes her. He likes her so much he could die. He then explains why he's been giving her the cold shoulder, telling her about the incident with her aunt when he was a child. Ryusuke tells her that if she can forgive him, then he would like her to be his girlfriend. But if she can't, then she should just forget about him forever. Midori, upset and confused, leaves, needing to think it over. She then encounters who other but the boy at the crossroads, who tells her don't forgive him and hate him for the rest of your life. The next day, Midori shows up, bringing Ryusuke some food, but when he opens the container, he finds a dead rat inside. In a heartbreaking sequence, Midori declares she won't forgive him and will hate him for the rest of her life. After this, Ryusuke is once again mobbed by admirers. At this point, there are literally hundreds of sickly looking girls swarming him. At that moment, the real boy in black emerges, and the girls flock to him in mass. The girls cry out they love him so much they could die, and the boy simply replies, "Then die." And this is one of the darkest moments I've seen in a Junji Ito comic. The girls all pull out box cutters, and in the next sequence we see that the fog has turned red because of the amount of blood that's spilled. Ryusuke shows up to see hundreds of dead bodies as the boy in black disappears into the red fog. As the news reports the incident, Ryusuke goes back to hiding. Midori shows up daily just to torture Ryusuke, calling him a murderer and force-feeding him disgusting food. At this point, she also begins resembling one of the crazy fangirls as well. Ryusuke tries desperately to snap her out of it, but she eventually runs into the fog, and when he finds her, she's dead with a box knife in her hand like all the others. As Ryusuke walks the crossroads distressed, he encounters a man asking for a fortune. Turns out that this dude is the married man whose son was killed by the crazy lady back in the Woman in Distress chapter. Crazier than that, this wasn't his only side piece, as he mentions 8 years ago having the same situation happen. This woman would of course been Midori's aunt who died. The man explains that he had a son at the time who would have been about Ryusuke's age. The boy disappeared into the fog right after Midori's aunt died. So long story short, the boy in black is likely this guy's other son. After this, the boy appears again, and he now has all the ghosts of the dead girls surrounding him. When Ryusuke sees him, he charges at him with a knife in hand, but ultimately is taken down by the ghosts. In the last closing page, we learn that the people of the city no longer go out at night, and that you can still hear the terrible screams of the dead. There's also mention of a new phantom appearing, the boy in white. Which leads us to the next chapter of Lovesickness, The Boy in White. It begins with a man arriving in the town. It's much foggier now, and everyone is constantly asking each other for their fortune, completely obsessed with the game. The man witnesses as the boy in black appears with a swarm of ghosts and passes through the area, followed by horrible screams. The boy continues to tell every ghost that they will never find love and to continue to die over and over. Then the man sees another figure, the boy in white. The man tells the boy he's exhausted by life and asks him for an easy way to die. The boy tells him to walk to the crossroads and answer 100 fortunes, and then the fog will clear. Believing he could at least do some good before he dies, the man begins giving good fortune to everyone who asks. He encounters a young couple who were told to do the same thing, so the three begin walking together. They encounter the ghost of a woman who looks like a walking corpse, leaking some unidentified ooze out of her eyes and mouth. I mean, ugh, this is gnarly. She pulls out a knife and begins hacking at her neck till her head comes off. And man, this sequence is one of the most disturbing I've seen so far. The boy in white appears again and begins telling all of the ghosts that they will find love. It seems Ryusuke has now become an opposite positive force against the boy in black. Between the two forces, the town becomes more dense and fogged than ever, and the man decides he doesn't want to die, going home with a feeling of peace. And that is Lovesickness. It's quite a tale, and I really like the way the story evolved. After reading all of these short stories, it was nice to have a couple of characters to relate to, and it was more impactful when they died. So overall, I highly recommend Lovesickness. This one was great. This next one is a two-part story all about a disturbing family. The strange Hikazuri siblings, Narumi's boyfriend. It begins with a dude named Kotani getting a phone call from an old classmate, Narumi. He pieces together that she seems to be ready to jump off a bridge, so he rushes to save her, and after this she begins staying in his room for weeks, not wanting to go back to her family. At first this is great, but soon Narumi begins showing her true colors, as she's really lazy and has been secretly spending Kotani's money on makeup. Fed up, he tells her to go home already, but she's also the worst kind of manipulator. She starts crying and threatens to kill herself, so Kotani is forced to let her stay. Eventually she's dragged home by her brother, and we meet her family. Her oldest brother, Kazuya, is now the head of the house since their parents died. Then there's her oldest sister, Kanako, her other brother, Shigoro, and her two youngest siblings, Hitoshi and Misako. They're clearly a psychotic bunch as they begin coming up with ways to torture and kill Kotani for stealing away their sister. There's actually a really funny moment here when the siblings pitch these horribly disturbing, messed up ways to kill Kotani, and then the youngest brother just comes in with, "How about we tell the boy he can't see Narumi anymore?" And they just all look at him like, yeah, you're definitely the boring one. Well, Narumi has had enough and starts talking about offing herself again, and clearly this is something she does a lot as the family straight up eggs her on. Eventually she douses herself in gasoline and does actually light herself on fire. So after a couple days, Shiguro goes and gets Kotani, telling him Narumi died and he must come to pay respects. Then this crazy ass family forces Kotani into bed with Narumi's burnt corpse. They wrap him up with the burnt body until he escapes and the corpse breaks into pieces. I mean, what the hell, man? He tries to escape but can't hide from the family, and then in a horrifying moment, the ghost of Narumi appears and the poor kid dies of a heart attack. Well, turns out this wasn't a ghost. The burned body was actually just a mannequin, and this was all a scheme to get revenge on Kotani. The family acts cold and uncaring that they just killed a guy, including Narumi, who you'd think would care a little bit. That leads us to our second Hikazori story titled Seance. The tale starts with the oldest brother Kazuya pretending to head off to work to support the family, when in reality he just sits around all day doing nothing. He stops to take a nap on a park bench and sees a photographer. Her name is Sachio, and she says she's trying to capture photos of spirits. Clearly smitten with the girl, Kazuya invites her to his house, claiming that there are all kinds of supernatural things there. So Sachio shows up the next day and starts taking pictures around the house, including the Hikazuri parents' grave. Kazuya tries to hit on her, but she quickly dismisses him, and Shiguro takes the opportunity to show her around, making Kazuya jealous. That evening, Kazuya berates Shiguro harshly in front of everyone. Misako, the youngest daughter, gets upset and goes into a crazy rage, and she claws at her young brother's face, leaving these deep, bloody scratches. It's weird because no one really does anything about it. They just let Misako act like an animal. Meanwhile, Sachio looks at the developed photos and sees that there are ghosts surrounding the place, especially around the youngest brother. The family then invites Sachio to their house once again. They're performing a seance to communicate with their dead parents and want her to witness it, but she shows up with her boyfriend to the disappointment of Kazuya. While attempting the seance, Shigeru suddenly convulses and spits up what appears to be ectoplasm before being possessed by the spirit of his father. The father uses Shigeru to rip Kazuya a new one, telling him he's worthless. Upset, Kazuya leaves and destroys the family gravestone. Sachio managed to get a sample of the ectoplasm, but discovers it to be a combination of wheat and flour. In other words, Shigeru faked the entire thing. Using his father as a threat, he begins to try and take Kazuya's place as the head of the house. Kazuya finds out he faked it, however, and the two begin fighting. Then suddenly, the youngest brother shoots real ectoplasm out of his mouth, which materializes into the giant head of their father. The ghost chases them outside, but is then sucked into his own broken grave. The young boy becomes conscious again and is confused, while his family now run from him, terrified. And that is the Hikazuri siblings, my friends. Moving on to the Mansion of Phantom Pain. This story revolves around a wealthy family. The only son of the family has a really strange condition. He stays in bed all day in constant pain. The weird thing is, this pain is sometimes outside of his body, like a strange version of phantom pain. Phantom pain is a real-life condition in which amputees feel pain coming from a limb that they no longer have. So the boy in this story is experiencing an extreme version of this. It's so extreme that the father hires a crew of people to assist him, as the pain will sometimes be in another room entirely. So this crew of workers must rush around the house rubbing random spots in the air to try and ease the pain of the son. Pretty bizarre. The father hires a new guy named Kozeki, and he's paid extremely well. However, the job is very stressful and there's not much downtime. The crew actually live in the house, so they can be on call to rub the phantom pain spots at any moment. Kozeki is particularly sensitive to pain, and he finds the longer he stays in the house, the lower his pain threshold becomes. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew and the boy's family barely feel pain. In fact, due to the nature of the job, they've acquired various injuries that they leave untreated, as they don't even notice they're in pain. This actually leads to the father dying due to an untreated wound. The mother pleads for the crew to stay, saying she'll continue to pay them, and if she runs out of money, she'll even give the mansion to anyone who doesn't leave. At this point, the mansion smells disgusting from infected wounds, but the crew refuses to go to a hospital when Kozeki begs them because they think he just wants the mansion to himself. Eventually, everyone dies off, including the boy with the illness, leaving only Kozeki, who now seems to absorb all the pain in the house and become just like the boy he came to help. The Rib Woman. This story follows Yuki, a teen girl who is insecure about her body. She's afraid to get into a swimsuit because she feels she has no curves. She learns from a classmate about a surgery to have some of her ribs removed, giving her a more narrow waist. She runs into her brother's girlfriend Ruriko, who seems distressed. She hears a strange instrument being played at night that seems to dig into her very soul. So Ruriko, Yuki, and her brother decide to track down the strange noise. Here they encounter a woman playing a harp-like instrument. She leaves it on a bench and disappears. Upon further investigation, this instrument seems to be made of a human rib. Ruriko freaks the hell out and breaks it to bits. The next day, she's found dead with all of her ribs missing. Well, I personally wouldn't be doing anything involving ribs after that, but you know, Yuki's trying to look snatched, so she goes ahead with the rib removal surgery anyway. Before the surgery, the doctor tells her that he has performed the operation twice before, and the first woman he performed on went batshit crazy. She kept asking him to remove more and more ribs, and due to his incompetence as a young doctor, he just went along with it. So Yuki gets the surgery and comes out with positive results, but shortly after, she starts hearing the disturbing sound that Ruriko did. She tracks it down to once again find the woman. Turns out it's the original woman who went crazy after the operation, and the noise is actually coming from her chest. She removes her shirt to show a really disturbing sight. Apparently, she had tried to replace her ribs with Ruriko's, and they're all tangled up with wires in her chest. It's a putrid mess. The doctor shows up, who I guess is in cahoots with the woman, and they start trying to kill Yuki, hoping to try the operation again with her ribs instead. Luckily, Yuki's brother shows up in the nick of time, and they manage to capture the doctor. Unfortunately, though, the rib woman escaped. And the story comes to a close as Yuki says, even now on quiet nights, she can hear the disturbing sound. Memories of real poop. Alright, now after all that pain, tragedy, bloodshed, and gore, let's take a break with one of Ito's purely comedic tales. Memories of Real Poop is an autobiographical account of Junji Ito buying fake dog poop at a festival when he was a child. It's pretty wholesome, honestly, as at first he's afraid to buy it because he thinks people will make fun of him, but eventually he does, and he gets a good prank out of it. My favorite part is at the beginning when he describes in detail how amazing the fake poop is. It's made up of 2 logs perfectly positioned with exquisite balance. Now that's just funny and a light way to end the collection. Okay, that's all I got for you this week. I'll be back next time with even more Junji Ito, so stay tuned. Thanks everyone for watching. If you like the intro and outro music that's likely playing right now, go check out Kill Me Katie. It's been a while since I've given him a shout out, but he's been letting me use his music in my videos since before I even had 1,000 subscribers. So go subscribe to his YouTube channel if you get the chance. Of course, big shout out to my patrons. If you want your name displayed at the end of every video like these fine people, consider becoming a patron, where you'll get access to some bonus content. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.